Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us at the Baron Thought Leadership Forum. My name's Dave Judas, and I'm the head of intermediary sales and national accounts at Baron Capital. I'm very excited to moderate our timely discussion of artificial intelligence, electric vehicles, semiconductors, and cloud computing. Our speakers today are Michael Lippert and Ishay Levin. Hi, Mike. Hi, Ishay.
Hello, everyone.
Thanks for joining us. They represent the 43-member Baron research team, the intellectual capital engine and true competitive advantage behind our alpha generation capabilities. Mike is portfolio manager of the Baron Opportunity Fund and the Baron Technology Fund, and he's also the head of technology research here at Baron. He's been investing in innovative companies and secular growth themes since starting at Baron over 22 years ago. Ishay Levin's assistant portfolio manager, Baron Opportunity Fund. He joined Baron in 2015 and is our lead analyst covering Tesla and the electric vehicle ecosystem. He's also one of our key software analysts and leads our efforts on researching space companies. We encourage you all to submit questions today via the Q&A function in Zoom. I want to jump right into it, and let's start with the basics, Mike, if we can. You talked about it in your quarterly. It's been around a long time, but help us define AI and what is it, what's happening now, and what does it mean?
Yeah, we've talked about in our quarterly letter that we've been investing in AI for years. Before AI was called big data, but now it's AI or ML, machine learning. We have been long believers that AI is the next major secular tectonic shift like mobile and cloud, and will be the most compelling force to power technology innovation and impact human life over the next decade. At its most basic, AI refers to computerized systems that mimic human intelligence, such as thinking, perception, acting, and reasoning. We've actually all been living with AI for about a decade. Most of the known use cases are what are called recommendation systems, such as the search results you see on Google, the videos that are suggested to you on YouTube or Netflix or TikTok, products that you buy on Amazon and other e-commerce sites, song and podcasts to listen to on Spotify, what ads you might see on a mobile app or an internet site. Certainly Ishay will talk about it, but Tesla's Autopilot is also based on AI. But ChatGPT, which launched as a free prototype on November 30th, 2022, and right after Thanksgiving, literally took the world by storm. I mean, we wrote in our quarterly, the public release of ChatGPT shook the world and may prove to be a seminal inflection point moment in the adoption of AI. ChatGPT is a chatbot built by a company called OpenAI, a private company which has a large investment from Microsoft that is built on top of a family of what's called large language models, LLMs, that respond to text inputs and provide articulate answers in a detailed, natural language manner never seen before by the wider public. ChatGPT introduced the world, with the exception of some experts, of course, to a type of AI referred to as generative AI. At a simple level, this is an artificial intelligence system capable of generating text, images, or other media in response to prompts. Let's go to a couple of quotes from two computing pioneers. The leading companies in AI today are Microsoft and NVIDIA. At the top, we have a quote from Jensen Huang, NVIDIA CEO. Jensen said, "We are at the iPhone moment of AI." By this, it means that AI will change the world like having a powerful computer, camera, communication device in the palm of our hands, change the world, and honestly, all of our lives, pretty much almost precisely 16 years ago. Jensen also said, the impressive capabilities of generative AI created a sense of urgency for companies to reimagine their products and business models. Startups are racing to build disruptive products. Incumbents are looking to respond. Further said, generative AI is a new kind of computer, one that we program in human language. Everyone can direct a computer to solve problems. Before, this was a domain only of computer programmers. Now everyone is a programmer. He finished with saying generative AI will reinvent nearly every industry. Bill Gates, the Microsoft co-founder, he said the development of AI is as fundamental as the creation of the microprocessor, the personal computer, the internet, and the mobile phone. It will change the way people work, learn, travel, get healthcare, and communicate with each other. Entire industries will reorient around it. Businesses will distinguish themselves by how well they use it.
perhaps from there, we can go to a couple of practical use cases with this go forward. Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, so for generative AI, again, generative is basically generating language, text, could be images, videos, um, real simple basic use cases, drafting an email, summarizing a report, writing and revising software code, developing or modifying an image or a video, analyzing or charting data, developing drugs based on molecular or cellular data. Think of the world where today, when we plan a trip, we do a Google search, maybe we go to Expedia, we click somewhere, we look at a hotel, we come back, decide whether to book it. In the future, you will be talking to, whether it's written prompt or it's your voice, to an AI chatbot. I might say in March, hey, I'm a family of four. My boys are 11 and 13. We're looking to go to a place to get in the sun. My kids also like to have some activities like hikes. And where's a good place to go? And ChatGPT will give a bunch of answers. I may say, oh, drill down. Cancun's an interesting area. I'm looking for a hotel for X amount of dollars a night, 2 different rooms, and it'll come back. And I'll have an interaction with that. AI will be like an assistant. And we have a slide of even asking AI to write a nursery rhyme. I'll let you all read the full nursery rhyme yourselves, but we asked ChatGPT as an example, write a nursery rhyme about the future of artificial intelligence. I'll just read a couple of stanzas. In a world of circuits, wires, and dreams, where machines think and compute, it seems, there lived an AI so clever and bright, guiding us through the day and the night. So these are just some of the use cases. And right now we're at the very, very early innings. And I think we're going to see use cases that we can't even imagine or think about now. But it's very basic. Think about generative AI as kind of that robotic assistant that will basically answer your every question and make your life and your work easier.
Great. And maybe talk about the layers involved in artificial intelligence, please.
All right, everybody. We can spend literally hours on this. At Barron, since ChatGPT came out in late November, we spent an enormous amount of research hours trying to understand the AI layers, the layers of the AI computing stack, and where the value lies. Today, I'm going to attempt to go through it at a very, very high level, and please, during the Q&A, we'll be happy to dig in more. At a very simple level, you have AI has training and inference. Training is how you train the model, input data to train the model. I'll talk about it in a second. And inference is a term that just refers to the answer, the result that you're going to get. At the bottom of the slide, we have semiconductors and other hardware. AI has spurred an inflection in demand for chips known as GPUs, graphic processing units. They get their name from their first major use case, which was around graphics and gaming, basically placing thousands of constantly changing pixels on a screen. It's also referred today as accelerated computing. GPUs differentiate from CPUs, central processing units, dominated by the likes of Intel. They do what's called parallel processing as opposed to serial processing, which really lends itself to AI use cases. At its simple level, basically dividing a problem into its component pieces, solving those problems or equations at the same time, and then putting them all back together for the ultimate answer. NVIDIA, with 90% market share, is certainly dominant in training today. We do believe there's a lot of value here. Yesterday, AMD made a presentation. They're the number 2 player in GPUs, number 2 in CPUs against Intel. And their CEO said that they believe the market will grow at a 50% plus CAGR from 30 million this year to 150 million by 2027. Other hardware refers to things like memory, storage, networking. Next layer, cloud infrastructure and or data center. AI workloads have an insatiable demand for compute, and they do need to be built somewhere. We believe most will be built on cloud computing platforms because effectively they offer the building blocks you need, the flexibility to scale up or down your workload, and lower costs in building on your own unless you yourself have massive scale. The dominant players are all household names: Microsoft Azure, Amazon AWS, Google, what they call GCP, and maybe the fourth player, at least in the United States, is Oracle with Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. Some large intercompanies, such as the ones that I just named, those with massive scale, Meta, used to be called Facebook, they'll build their own data centers, but we honestly believe very few will. We do believe there's value here. While infrastructure is a commodity, in cloud computing, scale wins, and so the scale players will be winners. It's too early, however, to know whether and which players will differentiate with their tools, including things like pre-trained models to build AI applications. We can dive in that a little bit later. The next layer, this is the critical layer, data. Some have heard this phrase, the saying, data is the new oil. Data is critical to the training of AI models. More data, better models. Questions here will be whether it's public data, proprietary data, or your customer's data. Is the data generalized or is it specialized, unique? There will be questions around privacy, security, compliance. These will be all major issues. But we do believe that this is where the value lies, that differentiated, unique data sets will yield differentiated AI applications. Models. This is complicated. We could go very deep. I'll try to do this at a high level. Effectively, generative AI models learn the patterns and structure of their input training data, and then they generate new data that has similar characteristics. Generative AI today is built on large language transformer models. They're called LLMs. This is an artificial intelligence system trained on a vast data set of text, articles, text, websites that can generate human-like text and perform various language-related tasks. These models are good at mimicking how humans, us, use language. I can help with tasks like, as I said before, writing an essay, answering trivia, creating a code, a poem, a song. But think about this. Language is used for much more than human communication. Software code is the language of computers. Proteins, molecular sequences, DNA sequences are the language of biology. And large language models can be applied to these scenarios of these industries. Questions will be, again, around models. Are they generalized models? Are they foundational models upon which you can build something else? Will it be domain or industry specific models? There will be open source, companies like Hugging Face, or there'll be closed models, OpenAI, again, invested in by Microsoft. The value. We think it's honestly too early to know, but we believe that generalized and foundational models may honestly become commodities. We are seeing hundreds or thousands of them out there today. And we do believe that differentiation on what I'll call domain or industry specific models will likely be the data, not the model itself. Applications, the next layer up, including chatbots. Obviously, ChatGPT itself is an application. Microsoft's Bard application. Google's Bard. Oh, I apologize. Google's going to kill me. For Microsoft and for Microsoft Office and other products, they have a name that they call Copilot, which is basically generative AI or ChatGPT helping you. This could be Copilot to draft or summarize an email, to prepare the first draft of an Excel spreadsheet or a PowerPoint presentation. They have a Copilot for helping you write software code called GitHub Copilot. And even today, they're seeing 40% productivity gains reported by developers. We also believe Gen AI will be built into other applications to improve the user interface. So Workday, which has an HR application, I might be able to simply ask it, which of my analysts got the best reviews this year? Or ServiceNow, which does IT service management. When I have an application crashing, I'll just be able to ask the chatbot which part of my IT stack is causing this problem. In terms of value, we think if you have a large user base, AI will help you serve them better and provide more value to that user base. If you don't, you either have to be a first mover, like ChatGPT, which was the fastest digital service in history to 1 million users, and now reportedly has over 200 million monthly active users, or you're going to have a really differentiated offering. So let me stop there with the stat. Oh, sorry, end users. Obviously, these are people like us. And so when I talked about applications, if you have a large end user base already, customers, workers, or consumers, that's who you are ultimately serving with AI. And the design is for your application to make the lives, personal lives and work lives of your customers, your users, easier. An easier way, again, to draft an email, an easier way to develop a trip, an easier way to find a song that you like, things like this. So let me stop here, David.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mike. And we already have a few questions coming in. I'm just going to combine a few of them into one last one for you. Then we'll go over to Ishay. You talked a little bit about winners and losers. I think people summarizing a few questions here are wondering, what are your bets in your portfolio on this? And are we, what moment are we at? Is the first inning, the second inning? If you can maybe address those two for a couple of minutes, and then we'll move over to Ishay, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I'll try to do this fairly quickly, and happy to dive deeper in. We think some of the big winners are companies like NVIDIA, certainly Microsoft, with a big ownership interest in OpenAI, as well as one of the major cloud providers that's incorporating AI. We do think we think Amazon AWS will be a real beneficiary. And we think Amazon will be a massive beneficiary in the retail business when you think no one has retail data like Amazon does. And so the experience with Amazon e-commerce might be very, very different in the future. We do think a lot of incumbent, software vendors with business applications will be winners. I mentioned ServiceNow, Workday, lots of others. They have to build on their advantage of having scale, distribution across large customer sets, embedded workflows that you're already doing today, and either proprietary data or customer data. Listen, in terms of losers, it's been kind of well reported in the media. Life may be very tough in the future for low-skilled workers. We could dive into that. I think if you're a digital app or service today and you have undifferentiated data at the core of your service, you're in trouble. And in all candor, we think Google is at risk. I mean, Google really has truly differentiated data. Every search result outside of China over the last 20 years, browsing data from Chrome, email data from Gmail. But today they already have 90% market share of search outside of China, and it's highly monetized with what we call sponsored blue links. And so if in the future different chatbots are able just to steal a little bit of that share, and let's say Google wins with the best data set, but they have 75% data share, that's obviously a negative. And we know the cost per query or the cost per question will be higher with Gen AI than it is today with search. And it's very early to know how monetization of Gen AI will evolve. Your second question is, what inning are we in? I think we're really in the early innings. And when I thought about earlier today, knowing that I would get this question and people will be like, oh, is it in the stocks? It's like, a year into Google search, or the first year of shopping on Amazon, or when, iPhone 2 or 3 came out. Like, did people think it was done? It's not done. We certainly understand there's been a lot of attention to these stocks. We all know how narrow the market has been. And at Barron, as we always say, what will happen over the next 3 or 6 months in terms of the market or stocks is really, really hard to know. But when you think about generative AI and how it's going to change the world, us as consumers, how it's going to change us as business people, I'm pretty confident that we are just scratching the surface.
Great, thanks for that, Mike. And with over 33% of your fund in Microsoft, NVIDIA, Tesla, and Amazon, I can see where your mindset is. Let's transition to Ishay for a few minutes here. What's going on in EV, Ishay? And I think as Mike said, autonomous driving is AI?
Thanks, David, and thanks everyone that joined. Is autonomous driving AI? 100%. I think it's not only AI, it's one of the biggest application of AI. I think autonomous driving is going to change every industry around us, right? Like from real estate, that we maybe need a lot less parking spots next to our houses, to healthcare because there's less accidents, to regional flights. Maybe instead of taking a flight, you take a car with a bed and you're going to sleep on the way. So autonomous is 100% AI use case, and it's going to be a very large one. Now, the industry been talking about this use case for very long. Just to give a few examples, Tesla installing autonomous hardware-related on their cars since 2016, on every car they produce since 2016. Mobileye, which is a leader in the ADAS market, which is automated driving assist, was co-founded by computer vision professor named Amnon Shashua in 1999. Okay, so this is a very long time. GM bought a company called Cruise, which is a robotaxi company, in 2016. So the industry understands the opportunity here. and they don't only understand, they also invest to capture that. Now, how do you teach a car to drive itself, right? Like you can do it in a more traditional coding. Think about every scenario that a car can see. If there's a car coming from the right and the light is red, you will halt. But then if the light is green, you will start to accelerate at this and this rate. It becomes very, very hard, right? Like impossible to do. There's too much variability. There's too many use cases. It's just impossible to do. What AI gives us is an amazing tool to make software intelligent, right? Like you put a lot of data into AI or into training engine, and the system will learn over time what is a car, what is a sidewalk, and where is the drivable path. So you're not allowed to drive through a car, you're not allowed to drive on the sidewalk. And effectively, over time, the system will learn if it needs to accelerate, decelerate, turn right, turn left, right, it can make the right decision. So AI is a really important tool in order to make this thing a reality. Now, this is a very hard problem to solve, right? Like I think Mike talked about the fact that you can use ChatGPT to try to plan your family trip in Cabo or something. If you make a mistake on choosing the right hotel, the mistake will be fairly small cost, right? Like maybe you will not enjoy your vacation as much. But in autonomous driving, if you make a mistake and you turn left instead of right, you can potentially kill yourself, kill someone else. So the cost of a mistake is very, very high, which makes this problem, the AI engine here need to be extremely accurate. So this is one of the aspects. The second aspect, if you think about driving, this is a highly dynamic environment, right? You have a car driving 60 miles per hour, potentially there's another car driving in front of you. So there's over 100 miles per hour of things that happen in front of you. The system needs to be almost real time, making real decision with the cost of mistake that we talked about is very, very high. So this is a use case of AI, a very big one, but very hard to solve. Now, I think your question was kind of combining EV and autonomous, which I think is an interesting, and I think maybe a lot of people kind of think about those two secular trends separately, but they are very much connected, right? Like the transition to electric vehicle give the automotive industry the opportunity to modernize the architecture. Suddenly you have a big battery. This battery is used to power very sophisticated computer and cameras and radars and LiDARs and all these other sensors that gives you the ability to drive through autonomous. So the way we think about it, we're going to have this kind of platform penetration of electric vehicle, which on top you can suddenly layer new use cases and new software opportunities with kind of autonomous or AR or everything else. But first, we believe that the EV penetration will kind of come in front. So I actually really appreciate the way you asked the question, and kind of these two are actually very connected in my opinion.
Great, thanks, Ishay. And let's go into that thought. We'll continue with the penetration story. You know, EV penetration today versus what were the expectations 5 years ago?
Yeah, look, we are students of history, right? Like when we started to invest in a lot of kind of new disruptive technologies, we are looking on what happened in the past and how kind of other technologies evolved. So we are students of history. We don't spend a lot of time looking back on what the average analyst estimated on EV penetration. But if you just look on, not even 5 years ago, if you go back just less than 3 years ago on fairly sophisticated analyst penetration expectations, a lot of expectations called for around 10% penetration for EV in 2025. And a lot of analysts expected 15% or so in 2030. They were obviously wrong, because in 2022, we already reached to 10% EV penetration, full EV, not hybrids and things like that, real EV in global penetration. So we got there a lot earlier than people anticipated. Now, I think it's really, really important, again, going back to studying history, we are getting 10% to 20% is kind of the critical mass point, right? Like if you just ask yourself how many people you knew that drove EV 5 years ago, it will be very, very low. But today, because the penetration getting larger, right? Like suddenly your neighbor have an EV, and maybe your brother and your grandma, right? Like there's more and more people, it increased the awareness. People maybe understand the benefit of EV better. So we're getting kind of crossing the hard point, and it will help getting into the even more steep part of the S-curve of the adoption of EV. So I think the critical mass is important. Now, why EV penetration happening? It goes back to kind of our initial kind of stock thoughts around electric vehicles. And I think, in my opinion, EVs are just a better platform, right? Like you don't need to go to the gas stations once a week. You don't need to change oil once in X amount of miles. So it's simpler vehicle to maintain. It's also safer, right? Like you have this huge battery with very low center of gravity, which means it's a lot harder to flip an EV than traditional vehicle. You don't have the engine block in front of you in case you have kind of a frontal accident. So EVs is just better architecture from a vehicle. It's also a lot of the EV product offering are extremely exciting, right? Like you have this huge screen, suddenly you can play games or watch Netflix on your car, things that we didn't have in a traditional vehicle. You have this really nice glass roof in front of, above you, autonomous features that we talked about. So that the vehicle itself is a much more kind of appealing. And I think many people, I'm not sure, are aware, but in certain segments, EVs are also cheaper. If you try to buy the base Model 3 today, it will cost you less than a comparable BMW 3 Series, for example. So cheaper, safer, better. In our opinion, it's just a winning formula, and this is kind of will help the adoption. I will just say two more things. The other things that will help the continued kind of penetration is there's more segments that have EV offerings today than in the past, right? Like if you wanted to buy electric pickup truck 5 years ago, you couldn't. Today you have multiple offerings. So I think over time you will get more and more segmentations. You can buy the car that you like, and it will obviously help EV penetration. And last thing that I will note, and I believe we'll talk about it in the rest of the conversation, is regulation. Regulation was very supportive for electric vehicle. It was very, very supportive in China, and now we have this fairly meaningful regulation in the US that will help US penetration as well. So hopefully I answered your question, but we're excited about the future.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Ishay. I appreciate it. And a lot of things involved in that curve going from 10 to 90% penetration. What are some of the risks in terms of the things involved? Materials, batteries, charging networks, the grid?
Yeah, there's no doubt when the industry goes from 10% penetration to 90, a lot of things will need to happen, right? Like you're building a new industry, you will need to identify the right resources, suppliers, right? Like there's a lot of things that will need to happen. You asked about charging. In my opinion, charging, it's an easier problem to solve, right? Like most of us charge either at home or at work. Supercharging is important. It's an important enablement, but I think it's a easier problem to solve than some of the very long supply chain kind of networks that we potentially need to solve in battery supply chain, right? Like nickel and lithium and all these other things. So on battery materials, I think we will have shortages between now and 90%. It's not gonna, right? Like there's a race between demand and supply, and in some years supply will be ahead, some years demand will be ahead. So I think we're gonna play a little bit of domino. Tesla talked about it in the last few years that they had cell shortage that limited their ability to grow. So I think we all understand the problem. There's a lot of funding that goes towards solving the problem, and we will continue to see this kind of evolution in some years better, some years worse, but it's very clear that we will have, in my opinion, the right capacity to support this transition on the supply chain as well. I would highlight a few more things. One, even on more stressed metals, if you go back to Tesla Analyst Day, they talk about the fact that even in in materials like nickel and lithium that consider to be more stressed in terms of supply and demand, they believe that the cumulative demand between 2022 and 2050 will represent only around a third of the materials that we are identified already that are extractable. So even if you assume that we're not gonna find more materials to extract, right? Like there's still enough material to support the transition. The question is, can we get it out of the ground and refine it and all these things at the right time, right cost, and things like that. The last two things that I will say is the industry is nimble, and there's a lot of new technologies that will help us. If you just think about the battery technology, 5 years ago, a lot of the expectations that we're gonna see more and more sophisticated batteries with high nickel, high energy density that will continue and push up and to the right in terms of the sophistication and what you need to meet the EV demand. In reality, we've seen that Tesla and others were able to extract a lot more efficiency from other places in the car outside of the battery itself. Better aerodynamics, better kind of tires, less wires, right? All these things that allow you to drive more efficiency. And what we've seen, Tesla And another industry, and the industry started to leverage again battery chemistry that was considered to be fairly limited and maybe will be used only in kind of small vehicles in China. It's a battery chemistry called LFP, or iron phosphate, that has lower energy density, maybe slightly less sophisticated than high nickel, but you can still get a very sophisticated, very long range, around 250 miles of range with an LFP battery, because we were able to extract all this efficiency from the rest of the vehicle. So I think we're going to see more and more of this kind of technology in our side, and it will help us diversify away from, right, like at the beginning it was only high nickel, now high nickel and iron, and I think we'll see new technology like sodium that allows us to diversify even further. And the last thing I will note is that when you put petrol in your vehicle, we burn it, you can't recycle it, right? Like batteries are highly recyclable. So as we go into the EV transition, and you're going to have more and more EVs that are kind of getting to the end of life, we will take those batteries, we'll grind it, we'll go through a process, and you can start putting these materials back in new vehicles. So this is a very, very big difference between the ecosystem that we support today with oil, that you always need to extract more oil to support more transportation, versus the recyclability of batteries that will be significantly better in the future.
That's great. No, thanks, Ishay. I think that answers, we're getting a ton of questions, and I think a lot of them were around, you know, the thought of will electricity requirements be supported, et cetera. I think you addressed a lot of that in your answer there. How does the IRA support domestically the whole EV transition? Who's going to benefit, and what might the impact be on other countries, whether China or countries of Europe?
Yeah, so maybe I zoom out for a second for people that are less familiar what IRA means. IRA stands for Inflation Reduction Act. Is a tax code that we passed in the government. Effectively, I think it will have very little to reduce inflation, but it should be very good for EV adoption. There's two big pieces for IRA today. There's a federal funding that will go towards manufacturing in the US. So if you make cells, battery cells, or battery packs in the US, you will get access to tax incentive. This can get up to around, on average, EV, around $3,000 per car. And then the second piece of that is for the consumers, which can get up to $7,500, as long as the consumer meets certain requirements of income, and the OEM, the auto manufacturer, can really meet certain supply chain on the battery chemistries or on battery components to meet the requirements of the government. So as long as you can get there, you can get up to $10,000 of federal funding or tax incentive per car. If you think about the average EV that's sold around $40,000 to $50,000, that's quite a hefty benefit and should help a lot of the EV adoption. So that's attractive. The goal of IRA, in my opinion, is to really onshore a lot of the capacity into US and maybe free trading countries. If you just look on the history of oil and how many wars we got into, right, like because we were dependent in other countries, if we as a society believe in electrification, we have an amazing opportunity here to redefine where we want to buy, diversify the supply chain, and really make ourselves better positioned for electrified future in terms of energy independence. And then the second is really enhance the demand and help the transition. The big beneficiary, in my opinion, is first of all the consumers, right? Like suddenly an EV is $7,500 cheaper. That's a massive benefit for consumers. So I think for me as a potential buyer of EV, I'm very happy about IRA. And from an OEM perspective, the beneficiaries will be OEMs that produce a lot in the US, which obviously, in my opinion, Tesla is the most American company. They are very highly vertically integrated and they produce a lot of the vehicle in the US. And OEMs that sell a lot of EVs, which Tesla owns around 60% of the EV market in the US. So Tesla, in my opinion, is the biggest beneficiary from the OEM side, but other OEMs will benefit as well. GM is building their own battery capacity in the US and obviously vehicles. Ford will start as well. So I think the whole industry will benefit, consumers will benefit. I think it's a great tax bill. What will happen between geographies? I think China being fairly aggressive on EV incentives. IRA will help in the US, and I'll be fairly surprised if the Europe or Eurozone will not follow with similar European IRA or incentives to help kind of create the same effect or same scale of effect. So I think this is not very good for all of us.
Okay, great. Lots of good information there. And maybe Brian, you could put up the slide that Ishay mentioned, better, safer, cheaper. Just a couple of thoughts on the automotive market, combustion versus EVs. While I'm digesting the large volume of questions here, so let me go back to Mike for a second. Bunch of questions, and one of them is, do you think the winners are likely to come from the private or the public markets? Throw that to you, Mike. And you're on mute, sorry. I'm on mute.
Oh my God, David. We should have been on Zoom for too many years to have made that faux pas. I think it'll be a mix. I think you'll see certain private companies that are able to innovate and do something different, or first movers, and certainly OpenAI, which is a meaningful player, not quite a subsidiary, but with Microsoft has a significant ownership interest, is a major player. I mentioned Hugging Face earlier today. That's another private player. Think of them as like a marketplace, and a whole bunch of different types of tools to help you manage, but open sourced generative AI or LLM models. But we also think that many of the public companies already today will be able to win in the world of AI, taking advantage of massive customer bases, taking advantage of data, whether it's customer data that's already sitting inside of your software, or other differentiated data. So we are, in our research, we are looking to make sure that the companies, have what we consider to be the right characteristics or ingredients for public companies to benefit from AI, asking them lots of questions on what their plans are, making sure they have a willingness to invest in AI against this opportunity. Because I do think, and I've been doing this now, as you said earlier, for 22 years, that companies have to innovate. The world is moving fast, probably even faster. We do believe that AI will, and what it's going to be doing in software code generation, for example, will help you innovate even faster. So if the public companies are basically sitting on their hands, they will be disrupted by the private companies. So the public companies are really going to have to innovate and move quickly. But as I tried to lay out earlier, there are lots of incumbent advantages. For example, if you're a software company and your customers are using you, your customers have all their data on you. People, if it's HR, everyone is going to, for example, Workday to do an HR issue, make a comment, review somebody. If they're able to build AI into their application, there's really no reason for you to change. But if they don't, someone else can disrupt you.
I'll pitch the same question over to Ishay and the EV space. Maybe comment on public versus private winners. And, we're getting some questions about any other winners outside of Tesla that you want to mention, even outside of the United States.
Yeah. Again, going back to kind of what we discussed on autonomous vehicle, I think autonomous vehicle can be a larger opportunity, right? Like what we've seen today is the evolution of the industry. We're going from combustion engine to electric vehicle. It will be good for the industry, but in reality, we are still the same industry, right? Like we're selling vehicles, we're going to make some money out of those vehicles, and the competition here, who will have more market share and who can make a vehicle cheaper. I think the revolution opportunity is the software, right? So if you can build a software and suddenly you care less about how many new cars you're selling, but what the size of the fleet, because now your TAM is not how many cars you sold today, but really how many cars you have on the road, and you can start charging certain amount of dollars. So I think the software part is really, really important on the way we think about the competitive dynamics. I think it's what we've seen over the last decade is a lot more expensive. It takes a lot more time than people anticipate. So I think having access to funding is important, and therefore being public is really helpful. Not only that, I think AI, going back to Mike's comments, right? Like data is really important. And the fact that some of the OEMs have this kind of bigger fleet with cameras and data collection is giving them the ability to collect the right data from the fleet and training the AI. So I do believe that the larger entities today that are kind of moving forward with EVs has an edge. we also believe that companies that kind of have a really fresh approach, everything from how they sell vehicles, software first, right? Like focus on really the software opportunity is important. So we do believe that there's going to be room for kind of Auto 2.0 newer players that are focused on the right things in order to build the competitive differentiation from against companies that are more legacy and have to cut through a lot of kind of inertia on how they used to do things, change the culture. It just, I think, can be tough. Again, we're selling around close to 80, 90 million units of light vehicles a year. We are starting very early. There's a lot going to be room. Tesla is not going to be the monopoly here, right? Like they're going to be a large player, but they're not going to sell 90 million vehicles a year. There's going to be room from other players. I think your question more or less is talking about guys like BYD, right? That we think is very interesting. We talk to them. I think they do really interesting things. They're coming from China with very interesting cost basis. So we don't think Tesla will be the only winner. I think Tesla is one of the biggest winners on this transition, and we remain excited about how big they can be. But there's going to be room from others, and we are following everyone else that is involved in this market.
We got a couple other questions I'll just combine, asking about the recent news on GM and Ford and Tesla charging agreement, and also on the difference between, electric vehicles, but when it comes to, semis or large trucks, is that something that's feasible? Is it harder? Can you comment on those, please? Thank you.
On charging, on charging the Ford and GM, honestly, I think this is an historical announcement, right? Like there's few interesting things here. One, the industry is collaborating in a way that I'm not sure we've seen in the past, right? Like Tesla has a very interesting advantage. It's a lot easier, I think, to buy a Tesla because there's enough charging network. One of the biggest pain point for non-Tesla EV buyers was the charging. So Tesla allowing other people to join is really helping the mission of electrify the EV fleet. I think the advantage for Tesla, or what Tesla gets in return, they get obviously some of this, what we talked about. They're transitioning from how much vehicles I sell every year to how much cars I have on the road, because I get paid on every time that you go to a supercharger. Now, not only a Tesla car that go to a supercharger, but also every EV sold by GM and Ford, right? Like, so let's say the EV car fleet, right? Like how many cars we have in the road today is around, in the US, 200 and 250 million. If you believe that electrification will happen over time, right? If you think about the opportunity for Tesla many years out, suddenly you can have billions of dollars that you can make as a vertically integrated player that maybe GM and Ford that effectively outsource it to Tesla for now will not have. So Tesla will have more revenue, which gives you more flexibility and be more competitive. I think you had a second part of your question. I'm sorry.
About the semi-trucks?
Semi-trucks, I think, is important because they are generating a big portion of emission. If I remember correctly, the statistics, it's around 1% of the kind of car park, and it generates around 80% of the emissions of transportation. So it's important section to electrify. The problem with semi-truck is they require a lot of batteries, right? So in an average semi-truck, there's around 900 kilowatt hour of battery versus an average car that is around 70. So you just need to have a lot more batteries for those trucks. And Tesla, if we are having kind of potential limitations on cell availability, Tesla will have to choose, do I want to sell one truck or potentially 12 Model Ys, right? So I think that the balance between them will define how quickly we'll electrify the semi-truck. But I think what is interesting, if you listen to kind of industry experts when Tesla unveiled the truck, a lot of people in the industry said that the features that Tesla talked about are impossible to reach, but Tesla already have those vehicles on the road. They demonstrated it, so I think it's very real, and they've proven that you can electrify even a Class 8 truck. So I think it's interesting. Again, I don't think it will be, like a super critical program for Tesla, but will be really important for us as civilization to electrify Class 8 trucks.
Okay, we're going to more questions on ChatGPT. Mike, I'm going to throw it back to you. A couple of questions I'll just summarize together regarding if we put our personal info in there, should we be, thinking about security concerns? do you think companies, this is interesting, like with the internet, might have an incentive to flood certain data sources in order to kind of bubble up to the top when there's searches through ChatGPT and other AI engines? What do you think of that, Mike?
Honestly, privacy, security, compliance will be critical issues in the development, evolution, adoption of AI. We're talking to lots of our companies that are already thinking about that. Even at Barron, we just issued some rules of what we could put from Barron information into ChatGPT. So that's people be very, very careful. I would say for a consumer, it's like the risk that you always had on the internet. This is just an evolution of, the internet, of your digital life. So you should be definitely very careful. There will be lots of businesses that will develop even consumer products for security. When it comes to enterprises, we're already seeing a lot of innovation and a lot of leading players, whether in cybersecurity, whether in compliance, looking at this as a vast opportunity to provide these tools to their customers. When we're thinking about one of the developing areas of AI today, which is software development, we have a company called GitLab, which we own in our portfolio, which is competing with Microsoft's GitHub, which of course everyone knows is also a big position for us. But GitHub has a very public database that they're using to help with code generation or code suggestions. But the concern about that is, do you know if the code's safe? Do you know if the code's secure? Do you know if the code is owned by somebody else? Where GitLab is trying to create a much tighter base where they are going to help their enterprise large customers with all of those compliance, security, and privacy issues. So we can talk for a long time on this, but these are definitely very, very important issues in the development and evolution of AI.
Okay, and there's obviously a couple of questions concerning, do you think we'll be able to determine authenticity in an AI future? And in a variety of things. This example is, how will entities such as college admissions be able to tell? I don't know if you can comment on that, but I'll throw it out there.
No, I think trust will be a very, very important issue. And, when it comes to the consumer use cases of AI, what chatbot you are going to use for either general questions or more specific questions. We went through the travel example, but there may be financial advice examples. We're seeing when it comes to, students doing homework already, that's a major, major issue at schools. There are some public companies that have gotten their stock utterly cratered because people can now go to ChatGPT for it. But the point is that trust will be really, really important. Just like we all had to evolve and basically trust, the answers from Google in search in the early days of the internet, or trust some of these other sites that we went to where we're getting customer reviews. So that will absolutely be a big thing. I think, again, there will be plenty of software companies that will be developed. They were already developed today in the digital world that we live in, that will make sure that when your son or daughter submits an essay into school, that they just haven't copied things. So we've already went through that. It will be a little bit different, but I think the basic technology that most schools have adopted will be utilized. But trust, that's something to watch. We're in the very, very early innings, and can you trust an answer from ChatGPT is a big issue. A term which I think is a horrible term called hallucination is when a chatbot or a service like this doesn't know the answer. It literally hallucinates and gives you an answer. And so oftentimes the answers are wrong. So I would urge people to be very, very careful in the early days of these services.
That's good advice. Okay, another question. Ishay, maybe you want to take this one. How would you compare and contrast the way Tesla's pursuing autonomy versus how GM Cruise and Waymo are pursuing it?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think we spent a lot of time trying to solve it. I don't know the answer for that yet, but right, like there's a different approach with the same goal, right? Like first approach, like GM and Cruise, they put a lot of compute. They are over engineering, right? Like they're like, this is such a complicated problem. Let me throw everything on it and make sure I have redundancy. I have the best sensors. I put multiple sensors that both trying to get the same information for me to make sure I have all the information I need in order to solve this highly complex problem. It means that they put more money on the system, it costs more money at the beginning, but the view is that, hey, once we solve it, we'll start optimizing, right? Like, and start maybe take some sensors out and reduce some of the cost, but first let's solve it. Now there's a other point of view, like Tesla, that like, we want to actually benefit from scale. And if you want to benefit from scale, you can't put a $100,000 sensor on each vehicle, right? So you start with kind of smaller sensors that are simpler, cost you less, but you can get the scale of putting it on millions of vehicles that collect this data that trains your AI machine. So I think there's two very reasonable approach. Effectively, we drive with eyes and our brain, and the Tesla system is cameras, maybe a radar, and a computer, which is the brain. So they are trying to leverage similar things that we leverage in order to make the car drive. Eventually, I think we will both kind of get somewhere in the middle. I think we will see a little bit of different use cases at the beginning, right? Like we see robotaxi like Cruise offered in very specific areas. Tesla is trying to offer their capabilities everywhere. So I think it's a race to the same goal, and I do believe that both approaches are viable and just different approach.
And here's a practical question I'm sure many want to know. If I have autonomous driving, will I be allowed to go over the speed limit? And what are the insurance implications also of AI and autonomous?
I think this, again, this will impact everything that we know about moving people, moving goods, and a lot beyond that, right? Like, I don't know if autonomous will be completely accident-free, but we should definitely expect to have less accidents over time. I think the initial goal is to be just better than humans. So if we have X amount of fatal accidents every year, I think it's very reasonable to want to have autonomous, even if it's 90% of these X accidents or fatal accidents a year, to start using autonomous. But it doesn't mean that we're not going to have fatal accidents on day one. Obviously, we want to have zero. So it will impact. I think over the very long time, insurance will just have very high premium, but we will insure it less. Maybe companies will choose to insure themselves when the operator of the fleet. So I think we don't know yet. I think it will change, right? Like if I want to buy a very expensive vehicle, but I use it just, I don't know, 2 hours a day when I go to work and back. So the effective cost per mile for me is very, very high. But what happens if I share this vehicle with 100 other people in my city, right? Like suddenly we don't mind to share the cost of a very luxury seat that costs $50,000 because we all share it across the time and it's very usable. So I think we're going to see a lot of changes in the industry. I think autonomous vehicle is not going to be one size fits all. We're going to have a lot of changes. And again, I think it will be one of the biggest transitions in our lifetime.
Great. I think I've hit all the questions that are out there. I want to throw it back to Mike to see if you have any last comments, and then Ishay.
Yeah, so thank you, David, and we appreciate everybody coming on this call today. And if people have follow-up questions, please reach out to us. What we talked about today is two examples of big disruptive themes or trends that are going on in society, in our economy. But we spend all of our time at Barron as a research shop looking at many different kind of disruptive trends and disruptive themes. And we think of ourselves as long-term growth investors. We look for where the growth is happening. And so the growth is happening in areas that are literally like changing industries: electric cars, AI, cloud computing, semiconductors, genetics in medicine, what's happening in space. And so what we went through today was just two examples, but this is what we as a research shop, the way that David started, we spend all of our time on. So we really enjoyed talking about these two trends or themes or industry disruptions, but there are many others that we look at that are important. I do believe that when you think about the next 10 years, these are two of the most critical ones and will be with us for a very long time. And oftentimes people ask about things like, David, the hype cycle. I think EVs are far enough along that we're certainly out of the hype cycle. AI, we're very early on. And so we don't dispute that there's a lot of hype associated with AI today. But again, it's no different than the kind of examples I gave earlier, the hype at the early stages of the internet or e-commerce, or the first time we had an iPhone in our hand. It's early today, but this stuff will be with us for literally the next 10 or 20 years. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Ishay, anything you want to mention at the end?
Not a lot. I think Mike mentioned all of that. From my perspective, we have the best job on earth, right? Like, we dedicate our life to try to study major changes in our reality, right? Like how the world will look like 5, 10 years down the road, and waking up every day and learning about it and going deep. I think it's, for me, it's a pure sense of happiness. So we will be happy to share what we learn. But yeah, this is a very interesting call, and I appreciate the opportunity to give our views on that.
Well, thank you guys both for sharing today. That was great insights, and I appreciate it. I'm sure everyone on the call does. I know many of these ideas are reflected in the Barron Opportunity Fund, BIOIX. Congrats, being up 35.73 year to date is amazing, but we're all long-term here. So even over the past 5 years, you guys are up 15.35 for the 5-year trailing, which is great. So I know All Cap invests primarily in high growth businesses, like a lot of the things we discussed today, transformative technologies. So if anyone wants to take a further look, barronfunds.com. There'll also be a replay of this call and other PM webinars there. So that concludes our call for today. I want to thank everyone and have a good day.